Oh, Christ is risen. Welcome to Stories That Work. I'm Deacon Adam Roberts, and my guest today, I'm excited. We've kind of haven't known each other that long. I guess we really started talking this year, but we kind of exchanged some communications like here. So, Steve, I'm glad to have you on.
It's good to be here. Truly, he's risen.
And I'm going to go ahead and I like to make things a little real. I already asked Steve because I know that every guest is going to be wondering, are you Steve or Steven?
Oh, yes. So this is where I make things intentionally confusing for everybody. I go by Steve. Hey, everybody, this is Steve. But anytime I write my name anywhere, I write Steven.
Yes.
So,
okay.
Yeah, that's
I don't
it.
want to, because your name Steven is up on the screen right now.
Yes.
So I don't want to confuse people and make them think, because I get a lot of names wrong. So I didn't want them to think I'd already practiced yours and talked to you about it. So,
and my grandmother called me Stevie. One of my uncles still calls me Stevie. So
wow.
That's the minority opinion. Steve is fine.
Okay, good. All right. So today's topic, in case you didn't see our postings online, we're going to be talking about youth ministry, young adult ministry. In case you are not familiar with Steve, which would surprise me because, about 10 years ago, Netflix became a household name. And I think a few years ago, Be the Bee became a household name for all Orthodox families, which was very encouraging as a father and a husband that we could see such a valuable ministry become a household name and across the board in American Orthodox households. So I'm really thankful for the work that you and your team have been doing. I know it's not just you. And so at some point, if you want to give a shout out to your team, we can do that. But you have been leading the way in a lot of these efforts. And so that's why we wanted to talk today. The main reason I wanted to talk to you is because we're at a point in American Orthodoxy where we need to be grounded in our theology, but innovative in our approach. And it's very easy to be grounded and then not innovative, and then everybody's bored and we're losing our children.
Yeah.
It's very easy to be innovative and not grounded, and then we're teaching our kids heresy because we don't realize how easy that is to mess up.
Yeah.
And so that's what caught my attention, I think, early on with the stuff you were doing, was that it felt grounded and innovative. And that's the narrow path we need to be walking with our ministries these days, because that's how we're going to reach America. That's how we're going to reach our own youth. And so I want to thank you for taking that route, because I think that's what's making a difference. And that's about it. So I think I've introduced you. I usually ask you to introduce yourself, but I had stuff to say. I was excited.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, but I just felt like it would, for me, success was my kids knew who you were. You were the Be the Bee guy.
That's
and
cool.
It's not like Hootie and the Blowfish. Like, he hated being called Hootie, but for any of those 1990s references, he hated that. But like, I think that means that you achieved something with children. They know who the Be the Bee guy is. Like, they know that you had a message to share, that you did the videos. And so I think we can be thankful that shows that you've been on the right path so far.
Yeah. And thank God, because we don't really do, we don't do like just sort of mindless entertainment. We're there and we're talking about Jesus, and we're talking about what it is to be an Orthodox Christian. And it's encouraging, right? Because we have almost this narrative that young people are disconnected and young people don't care. But when you give them the gospel, and when you give them, like, navigating that tension that you said, the gospel that we've received, but giving it in a creative sort of way, I think people respond. And it's great. And it's, all glory to God. Thanks to the wonderful people that I've worked with over the course of the past 6 years. Too many to say. People have transitioned in, helped out part-time, full-time. So it's really been a huge effort, and it's been wonderful, and it's been fun. And I think more than anything else, it's been a joy for me. And I'm glad that people are kind of resonating with that joy, because Christ is risen. And like, what else is there to say at the end of the day? Yeah,
truly he's risen. So if you could actually, before we get into the topics, because you're going to share actual stories, and, for those who follow, before we get into that, do you mind giving just a highlight on who's part of your team right now? I know people come and go, but you've got some key people right now you're working with. And I think, I think people don't know that you are working with the team. It's not just you alone.
Yeah, thank God. And this is one of the blessings of sort of, being funded by the Archdiocese right now, the Greek Archdiocese. At this point, our team is basically our 4 full-timers. there's me who, directs and goes out on the retreats and does the media stuff, videos, podcasts, all that. I work with Christian Gonzalez, who's been here behind me the longest. He's been here for about 4 or 5 years now. I lose track of time. I apologize. He goes out with me to do Be the Bee retreats. He works with me on the media stuff in particular. Cassandra Garibaldi, who's been with us for a few years now, she's our training and resources coordinator. So she does a lot of the curriculum stuff that we do as well. A couple of years ago, we branched out from just the media stuff to kind of more brick and mortar ministry stuff for youth groups, families, things like that. And then Maria Pappas, who works on editing with us and works with just like logistics and everything, really helps the trains run on time and keeps us on task. And that's our 4 right now. And there's people who've been interns on the way, past directors. I mean, I've had the blessing to work with a lot of really wonderful people over the course of the past 6 years now. It'll be 6 years in June when we started this whole thing. So thank God.
Yeah, I wanted to point that out because we're talking about youth and young adult ministry. It can be easy to think that there's like supermen or lone rangers. And really the best stuff I've seen is when it's a team effort, even at the parish level. If there's a team effort, what you accomplish, the synergy from that versus one main person, even if you have a hired youth director, that hired youth director is hoping to have the parents come alongside and not just do all the work by himself, right? Mm-hmm. And so you want that team approach. And so I love that you have that team approach. All the stuff I work on is a team approach. You may follow some of the work I do and see that I'm constantly cranking out stuff. I do that because it's a team. Everything we're working on is that team approach. And so I think having that model at the top and then working down with that really does help send the right message.
Yeah. I mean, and I think there's at least 2 main reasons why that's important. One, I think the team is what helps us to straddle that line between fidelity to what we've received and creativity in the way that we're saying it. I mean, you take Be the Bee, for example, none of that was off the cuff. I mean, every episode was scripted. Every episode was written and reviewed by at least 1 or 2, sometimes 3 people. So just to make sure that we were on the right path, we wanted multiple minds together, sort of prayerfully, intellectually, making sure that we were doing it right. And there's such a wealth of talent that exists in the church right now. And I think we've had an instinct for whatever reason in the United States to sort of centralize, to over-clericalize, but there's a lot of really wonderful lay people who have wonderful things to give. And the more I think we can tap into these talents, the more we can unleash abundance, where we've been dealing with a lot of scarcity when it comes to ministry stuff over the years, because there's only so much one person can do. But when you allow a team to give whatever talents they have, thank God good things happen, because it's incarnational. It's what the body of the church is, right? From our fingers down to our toes, every member of the body has something to offer.
So we have a slightly different format today, in that I asked Steve, and you graciously agreed. I've asked this before, but we don't always get to work it out, to bring actual stories. So I think you have 3 or 4 stories you're going to share with us that worked. So I think it's time for us to get into those stories. So Sure. What is the first story you want to share?
So we'll focus on Be the Bee, I think, at first. That's probably what we're best known for. That was the original project that we started when we started this whole experiment, rebranding and rethinking youth and young adult ministries as Y2AM back in the summer of 2013. And then September of 2013 is when we started Be the Bee. And so one story that I want to share is from like a youth perspective in particular. There's a private school, an Orthodox school in the Midwest, that has used Be the Bee over the years as part of their religious education kind of criteria. And when the series ended a couple of years ago, we got this stack of letters from the 4th grade from this school. And it was really wonderful. It brought tears to my eyes just flipping through these letters from these kids. And like some of them were silly and talking about like their favorite gags from the show. And some of them were more, kind of more serious and more heartfelt. But the one that to this day continues to stick out in my mind is there's this little girl at 4th grade who says, one of the goals that I had for myself was to pray every night before bed. And I wasn't able to do that until we as a class watched one of your episodes. We talked about it. It really did something sort of in my heart. And since then, I've been praying every night. And I pray for you guys because you were the ones who taught me how to pray every night. And that for me, I think is just such a wonderful yardstick of what we're shooting for in terms of like things working, right? It's not simply eyeballs to a screen. It's some sort of transformational renewal in the life of this kid who's watching this video. Like, I don't care if people watch the videos and then nothing happens, but here's this 4-year-old girl who watched and now has a deeper relationship with God and talks to him on a daily basis because of that. Like, that's what works, or that's, I think, an example of something that worked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think there would be anything higher to shoot for than helping children become closer to God.
Totally. And if nothing else, right, one day when I die, hopefully I've got her sort of in my corner when the judgment happens. Like, oh, he at least did this one thing. That's like, that's his onion and the onion of the guys that we worked with. So God willing, anyway.
So you mentioned Be the Beat. Before we go to the next story, can you give like a short explanation of where that came from, that idea? I mean, it just was such a great idea. It resonated so well. It spread quickly. Where did this come from?
Yeah. So this goes back to the summer of 2013. I graduated in May of 2013 from seminary. I'm an alum of Holy Cross School of Theology up in Boston. Started working for the Archdiocese, was hired by the then director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries, Father Jason Roll. And he had kind of this vision that, the thing that he always used to say time and time again is that, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. And like his thesis, right, is that we've been doing that for ministry. We've been doing kind of the same athletic events, the same cultural events, the same sort of outdated model of what ministry is, and we're losing people, and somehow we're expecting different results by doing it again and again. So he had this kind of, he was bold enough to have this critique of ministry. And he assembled this team. It was me, Nick Leonis, who was doing young adult stuff at the time, Alexis Giannopoulos, who was our administrative coordinator. The four of us really put our heads together and said, okay, what can we do with that critique? And so we rethought sort of the vision of ministries, rethought and kind of like really symbolized this with branding, like Y2AM is this new thing. We're not thinking of ourselves as merely a department of whatever, new ministry vision, new ministry direction. And what we wanted to do was have a project to really embody what we were doing. And I mean, I was a huge fan of YouTube. I mean, and so many people are fans of YouTube's. And I realized that there's a lot of, at the time anyway, you could watch something on history, on science, on whatever it is, like really great intentional programming that not simply informed you, but also just deepened your appreciation about a particular topic. And there was nothing about orthodoxy at the time. Like if you searched orthodoxy in YouTube, you would get recordings of services or isolated hymns, and that was kind of it. There wasn't really anything like made for YouTube. So we put our heads together, we put this together, and Father Jason, actually, the former director, Be the Bee was his go-to sermon when he was a camp director. And I had never heard of the metaphor before. He explained it to me. And it became this wonderful lens, right, to really introduce people to the fact that the kingdom is at hand. God is real. We just need the eyes of a bee to be able to see him. And it became kind of the thesis statement of this show. We tried it. People liked it. And then 133 episodes later, it seemed to have made some level of difference in people's spiritual lives. So thank God.
Yeah, thank God. Absolutely. So if there's nothing else about that, maybe it's time to hear the next story.
Sure. And this is another Be the Bee story, now like maybe shifting upwards to adults as well, because I think sometimes, we people, I think, can dismiss youth work, I think, as being like, oh, it's only for kids, whatever it is. But I think from a big picture vision, youth work gives us the opportunity and the freedom to be creative when maybe in other places we can't. And sometimes the beneficiaries of that creativity are people who are a little bit older than we had in mind. So, we originally conceived of Be the Bee as a thing for young people, a thing for junior high schoolers. But even just this past a couple of months ago, it was during Lent, actually, of this year, a woman reached out to me, and she was in Connecticut here in the Northeast. And she visited a parish that was up there. She was there for like a family wedding or whatever it was, had never set foot in a church before, instantly realized something was here. And her priest, actually, one of the first things that he did was he recommended Be the Bee to her to be kind of an interesting and simple way to get to know what the church is all about. And long story short, a couple of months later, she ends up getting chrismated and welcomed to the church. And it's a really wonderful example of the way that like some of this, the enthusiasm and the thirst that people can have is going to be satisfied like face to face by a competent pastor who's going to like look somebody in the eye, talk to them. I mean, this wonderful priest, he was with her sort of week after week guiding her. But the way that some of this media stuff can be an extra tool in the tool belts of pastors who are actually there on the ground. And I mean, this is just one of the many stories that we've had of young adults and not so young adults, people who have found the church and come in through a providential Googling or a YouTubing or whatever it is, or because somebody made the recommendation. And this is just something that I actually got to meet her recently because she came and visited the Archdiocese. And it's another cool example of the way that people of all ages can be changed. Their lives can be changed. They can be brought closer to Christ, right? Closer to the chalice, closer to the Lord, because of the way that we can be faithful to what we've received and creative in the way that we're sharing it with people.
Yeah, I think it's good to remember that we can learn from any source, any medium. God can use so many different ways to reach us. And so, if I'm reading to my kids and I'm reading a Bible, a children's Bible, I can get something out of that, even though it's an intended target for like a children's Bible. So I think that's good to point out that Be the Bee, while you had that target audience of the youth, it doesn't mean that's the only place that God's using it.
Totally. Our former director, Father Jason, what he always used to like to say is that he kind of saw Be the Bee as almost like a Pixar sort of thing. Like a little kid could watch it and get something out of it, and an adult could get something and get something out of it. And again, from kids who are actually like learning good formational Christian practices to young adults who were either reverting back to the faith after having fallen away or actually converting and joining the church. Thank God the results are there. Thank God. So.
Yeah. And as a parent, I have to admit, and I think all parents need to admit, there are times my kids come home and have learned something I didn't know. And so I can learn. I'm not going to know everything and teach all of it to them. I study it and I try to learn a lot. And, some people might say it's embarrassing. You're a deacon. You should know everything your kids are going to know. But no, it's the Orthodox faith. I mean, I'm not going to know it all.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, and this becomes kind of a question of ministry, a question of authenticity. I mean, kids in particular, right? But I think people can sniff that out when we're posturing, when we're pretending to know things that we don't. And all that does is it sets us up as hypocrites. I mean, if we have the humility to say, I don't know something, let's discover this together. If we have the humility to say, I still know the Lord, despite the fact that I'm wrestling with this thing as I understand it, that the church teaches, whatever it is, like, I think there's grace there. There's grace in allowing ourselves to be weak and allowing God to come in and fill some of these gaps rather than have this pretense of, I know everything and I can teach everything, right? I mean, like, and this goes back to the team thing, right? Like, Be the Bee is not me. It's not that I have all the answers. It's the amount of patristic books that we've read through, the other people who have written scripts, edited scripts. Like, there's no one person who can do it all, him or herself.
Right.
And sometimes, and that happens on a day-to-day basis.
So what's the next story you got for us?
So this is a story from kind of a supplementary thing that we did, I think, the 2 years after Be the Bee started. We started going around and doing these retreats, and the retreats have evolved over time. They were initially just for kids, and now they've become more of a multi-generational experience. At this point, it's 6th to 12th grade, and then adults, kind of 18 and up. And they're Be the Bee retreats, Bee treats as we call them. And we've been doing them kind of in its full sort of current model for, I think, the past 3 years now. And there's really wonderful feedback from this past winter, I think it was. We went and we did a retreat, and a priest was there, and the priest had sent his kids, and he sent us an email afterwards, and he said, look, I've done retreats for a long period of time. I've sent my kids to a bunch of retreats, and I keep getting the impression that things are sort of in one ear, out the other. But my kids have walked away from this particular retreat, not simply knowing stuff, but having internalized certain things. And the way that we do Be the Bee retreats is we try to make them a little bit less didactic, and we try to really double down on, for lack of a better word, like spiritual skills. Like, we sit there and we teach kids to be silent, and we teach them to pray. We sit there and we teach them like how it is to be a good listener for your neighbor. And we do stuff. We pray with and for each other. We get in a circle and we sort of like do it. We pray out loud. So it's much more visceral. And, this one dad who was a priest, like, who'd seen his kids go through a bunch of things, who'd led a bunch himself, was really blown away by like the fact that something changed in his two kids, that they didn't walk away simply like having learned something, but they walked away being able to do something that they couldn't before.
I think that's quite incredible because, as someone who leads retreats myself, you're hoping you're not just walking in for like a weekend pep talk. Yeah. Or, it was a great moment, but then nothing really came out of the weekend.
Yeah, sort of the blip, right?
Yeah, it's a blip, and it's like, yeah, that was good, but what's gonna be the lasting effect?
But so what? And that's actually the way that I even try to like set them up when I do retreats with kids. I lay all my cards on the table and I tell them like, I was once a child too, many moons ago, and I was bored by many retreats that I went to. And my goal is for you not to have that. My goal is for this to be the beginning of something new for you. And if you're not into it, that's okay. God loves you and I love you, and you're more than welcome to nap through this entire time. Here's your workbook. If you want to doodle, God loves you, I love you, that's okay. If there's something here that you want to take away from, you're more than welcome to. If not, and like, I think when you treat people as agents in the development of their own spiritual life, not simply as recipients of knowledge, but of people who are now have this sort of sacred task that is given to them. Like, this is what prayer is, not simply conceptually, but practically. This is what silence is, not simply conceptually, but practically. Like, that does something. We go back and we look at the church in Acts. It's the way. The church is sort of like this thing that we do, not simply these abstract principles that we confess. And I think a retreat is more likely to be a blip when it's overly abstract, overly distanced from like the real and lived experience of being a Christian in this particular time, in this particular place, with these particular struggles.
So what I'm curious about is, are you still doing these B treats?
Yeah. We thank God we've gotten some funding from Leadership 100, and we've paused right now, but we're going to start them up again in September. And I think the first one, actually, we are in the process of rescheduling. We were going to be in Jacksonville. I think we're going to have to reschedule, but we're going basically from September through May. And we limit it to like one a month. Sometimes we do sort of supplemental retreats, but Christian and I do them together. And Christian now has 3 babies. So I try to make sure that he's not away from home all that often, because I think that would be unfair. So it's usually once a month from September through May.
And are these only in Greek Archdiocese parishes, or are you in a number of jurisdictions? So for a variety of unfortunate practical reasons, we tend to host them in Greek parishes, but they're open to everybody. And that's that point is they become regional. And like, we've had situations where we were in San Francisco, for instance, and people flew up from San Diego. We were in Chicago and people drove up from Detroit. So at our peak, I think we've had close to 300 people for a particular retreat. We've definitely hit more than 200 a couple times. But the goal is the more the merrier. And what I really love is the fact that we get this wonderful distribution of people. I mean, we have from the Greek Archdiocese and Antiochians and Russians and OCA and Copts and whatever. I mean, like, people come from all over the place, and it's a really wonderful icon of, these people who love the Lord and want to sort of deepen their love for the Lord. And we get together in a place that's big enough to accommodate all of us, and we do our thing. I think it's good to share. There's nothing wrong with, you work for the Greek Archdiocese, and having a Greek Archdiocese parish host an event that everybody is welcome to come to. I was part of a ministry for a few years where we asked the Antiochian church to host it, but we opened it up to everyone else. And so I understand that completely. That makes a lot of sense when we're dealing with jurisdictional, guidelines,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, as long as things are open to everybody, as long as like on the ground, like, thank God for it. At the very least, we can have people from whoever can come. And the great thing is, because of the grants, they've been free. Maybe this is one of the websites we can put in the comments bar later. If anybody's interested in finding one that's in their area or bringing us out for one, it's y2am.org, which is our main website, y2am.org/beetreats, BEETREATS. And we can put that in the show notes later.
Yeah, we will be adding a number of links to the show notes once it's over. It does take about 5 to 10 minutes for Facebook to finish the recording and post it, as a broadcast, so we can post those notes.
Cool.
You might have one more story for us, and this would think I'd be our last one.
Yeah, and this is another B-Treat story. So the way we normally do them is I lead the youth track, the 6th to 12th grade, and Christian leads the adult track. Which tends to be, clergy, parents, teachers, grandparents sometimes. I mean, really 18 and older, so college students. And we got this really wonderful feedback. There was a parish we visited, and one of the moms was kind of like the advisor of the youth group, and she was one of the people who brought us in. And maybe a month after we hosted, she sent us this email, and she said, I'm really surprised by the way the skills that I've learned at the retreat have caused me to be sort of a more humble mom, because we talk about listening, we talk about things along those lines, and we do these very practical sort of listening exercises. And she was in the middle of a conversation with her daughter, and she was not listening to her daughter, which is not a surprise, right? There was an interesting survey which came out, and if I remember correctly, like 70-something% of teenagers say that their parents spend too much time looking at their phones rather than paying attention to them. So, sometimes we can think it's the kids with their Snapchats and whatever, but lack of attention and lack of presence is a human problem. And so she's there, right? And she kind of catches herself, and her daughter, who had been through these listening exercises, we talked about boundaries and everything during the retreat, said to her mom very gently, but very firmly, like, "Mom, I would really appreciate it if you did a better job of listening to me right now. I'm hurt by the fact that you're giving your phone more attention to me." And it was this moment for the mom of pride that her daughter realized this boundary and kind of pointed it out to her mom in a very firm yet vulnerable sort of sense, like, "I need you and you're not here for me." And it was this very penitential moment for the mom. And she's like, when I scheduled the retreat, I thought that my kids were going to learn something, but I walked away being a more attentive, more present, more faithful mom as well. So it was a really kind of wonderful that this retreat kind of changed their family dynamics in a really beautiful sort of way.
That's incredible. Yeah, my wife will tell you, if I can't say it first, I'm like one of the worst listeners I know. So, but I feel like, just that one skill set of, if I could change anything about myself, just being a better listener, how that has changed my relationships, how that's changed whether people knowing I care about people, but do they know it? And that one little thing can change, everything, just becoming a better listener. I think that's pretty amazing that you that teach that. That's what I learned, actually. I give you a random reference. When I first started in ministry, everything I did, I had a podcast, which I've kind of retired on because I'm busy doing video now, but I had Go Forth on Ancient Faith.
Yeah.
And my first interview was Metropolitan Callistus Ware.
That's amazing for a pilot.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the only way I knew how to start. I was like, that's what I want from my first episode. So I pestered him, and he said yes. And we had no time to prepare. Okay. And all he knew was my podcast was about evangelism. That's all he knew. And that's been my interest now for several years, and what started the podcast. And so he had one answer, and he said, "We have to be better listeners." And that was what all my research was leading to. And I just had this giant yell of excitement inside of me when he said that. And I had to be quiet and let him finish speaking. But I was just like, yes, we have to be better listeners. And I'm the chief of bad listeners. That's what I say on Sunday mornings. I'm the first of bad listeners. So,
and that, right? I mean, I think that concept as this practical skill with real spiritual importance is so important, I think, because one of the great temptations of our age is distraction and lack of presence. We're distracted from each other, so we can't be good listeners. It compromises our ability as parents, as children, whatever it is. We're distracted from God, which is why we don't think he's there, because our minds are elsewhere. But then even in terms of straddling that divine between being faithful to what we've received as Orthodox Christians and creative in how we preach it. I mean, when the fathers that existed in Roman times, they knew Mediterranean, Hellenic, Roman culture. They listened, they read the poetry, they read the philosophy, they understood. And that's what allowed them to be able to preach the gospel in a way that people understood. I mean, we have to know America in order to preach to America. And we have to know the people that we're ministering to in order to preach to them, or sometimes not say anything and just be with them, right? Because we don't always need to say something either in terms of sharing the gospel.
Yeah, I'm good at always saying something when I shouldn't. I'm really good at that.
There's a buddy of mine from seminary who became a priest. He used to say one of the most dangerous things in existence is a clergyman and an open microphone. Because that somebody's going to take it and somebody's just going to say stuff. And that's what we do, right? It's because we're trained to talk, we're trained to whatever. I'm doing it now, but sometimes just being with people, being present with them in a very physical, experiential sense can do wonders.
Well, I really appreciate your time. We're wrapped up here. I try to keep the episodes about 30 minutes, and we're right at 30 minutes. you've given four great stories that I think can show the viewer that there's a lot happening here. I'm excited to hear that the bee treats are ramping back up in September. That those videos, the bee videos, are up and available, right?
Yeah, and actually, we're toying with the idea of bringing them back. We might do 2 sort of non-weekly episodes now, like the Greek Archdiocese's new Archbishop, and we're toying with a couple, videos maybe sort of leading up to that, and maybe in the fall or the spring at some point we'll bring them back as a weekly sort of offering. But yeah, and I miss doing that, and I definitely want to get back into the weekly video game as well.
All right. Well, that's it for us. As promised, we will, as soon as we end the session here, Steve and I are going to post some links in the comment section below the video so that you can go visit some of these websites that we've been talking about and check out some of these sources. So don't hesitate if you don't see it yet there. We're going to be doing that as soon as I hit end broadcast. We'll be typing that into the notes. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad that we got to share this. And these are some great stories.
Yeah, and thank you for doing this. I think in terms of tensions, it's important for us to be kind of critical about, things that are not working and ways we can improve. But I also think it's really important for us to celebrate successes and realize that not everything is lost. Like, there are people who are coming to Christ. There is really wonderful work to be done, and we can find it and we can double down on it and keep proclaiming the gospel.
This is why we learn the saints. The saints have a success story. These are stories that work.
Yeah.
When you study the saints, but we have some modern stories that we can look at that can help relate to what's happening.
Yeah. Thank God.
Okay. All right. Thank you, and God bless.
Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen.